Yeah, sure. I can send you a PDF file. No problem.
Okay, we are good to go now, Sari.
Yeah.
So let me just formally introduce you once more. If you go back to your title slide.
Right.
Welcome everyone to today's session of Zoomdemic. Today we have with us Sari Hamoud, who is a student, a research scholar from our Center for Linguistics, JNU. And he'll be talking to us about processing of syntactic ambiguity, psycholinguistics of L2 learning. For the purpose of this presentation, you raise your hand or type your questions in the group chat, and they will be brought to the attention of the speaker as and when he permits in his talk. Otherwise, we can always have a good question answer round at the end. Sari, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ojaswi, for this wonderful introduction. Today's talk is going to be a summary of my work in the PhD, and I've tried to simplify everything because many people are not they haven't gone deep into psycholinguistic theory, and the main aim is to introduce my work and also to talk a little bit about the methodology and the way we do things in psycholinguistics. So the title of the presentation is Processing of Syntactic Ambiguity and Psycholinguistics of L2 Learning. I'm going to talk about the some important terms to understand my research. Take a closer look at syntactic ambiguity and look at the SPR procedures that I have followed, the items and the way they were presented, and we'll just briefly glance at the results. So let's go ahead and start with some important terms. What is psycholinguistics? I mean, many people talk about psycholinguistics and they don't really take a closer look at what it does. It's basically the study of how the brain processes and stores language using behavioral, that is stimulus and response experiments, neurological like brainwave signals, and other types of real-time or online experiments. And when we say real-time or online experiments, it is the opposite of offline. And in offline, it's not about the internet. We're not doing experiments on the internet. We're actually doing an experiment on a computer, a dedicated computer. And when a participant reads a stimulus, right, a sentence is the stimulus, their response, for example, clicking a button, is recorded by that computer, and the response is usually in milliseconds. I think actually talked about this before. And offline experiments, we've been using offline experiments throughout our lives to get marks in the exams. So you get a question or you get a text, you read the text, you answer comprehension questions, and that's offline experiments. It doesn't tell us anything about the process itself that's happening in the brain. It doesn't tell us anything about the working memory. It just tells us about the end result. Whereas online experiments give us step-by-step preview of the procedure that is going on. And we study a linguistic phenomenon. It starts usually with syntax. Syntacticians point out the phenomenon. We try to understand it. We use replicable experiments in order to confirm a hypothesis. And we are generally trying to confirm the hypotheses of UG, universal grammar. And we also try to develop scalable models of language comprehension and production. Scalable as in models that try to better understand language processing throughout human languages, not just for English. So whenever we talk about psycholinguistics, we always hear the word the parser. What is the parser? If you think about the parser, it's like the CPU of your brain when it comes to the language device. So it's the central processing unit. It's a conceptual device within the architecture of language. This device is responsible for the efficient incremental processing and interpreting of spoken utterances or written sentences. So your brain tries to attach incoming information, words and phrases, and reach an interpretation as soon as the information is reached to the brain. And this process is automatic, as in it happens subconsciously. You're not aware of that process happening. And it's based on analyzing the sentences using several cues: logical, lexical, pragmatic even. Of course, the beginning theories, the early theories only thought about, assumed that the parser relies mainly on syntax. Other models, recent ones have suggested otherwise. The incremental, that is, the parser does not wait to hear the end of the sentence. The parser starts interpreting the sentence from the beginning of the sentence. The incremental nature of the human parser sometimes is problematic because it could lead to parsing errors. And these parsing errors are actually interesting to psycholinguists because they indicate how the process of parsing is happening. And they tell us about lexical and syntactic ambiguity. And they would normally lead the parser to go back and reanalyze the sentence to revise initially constructed structures. So why ambiguity? So let's take a look at the following slide. So what do you think? Now, this is a question to all of you, dear participants. What do you think of ambiguity what comes to your mind? What comes to your mind? Just go ahead and answer this in the chat box. Just I'm opening the room, the floor to everybody to participate. So when I say ambiguity, what comes to your mind? Of course, the word ambiguity comes, the etymology of the word from ambi, which is dual. So you could have an ambidextrous person and an ambivalent person, right? Ambivalent means a person with two minds, ambivalent, right? What else? Multiple interpretations, says Ajuswi. Binu says more than one distinct interpretation. Absolutely, yep. Can you think of an example of an ambiguous sentence? I mean, eat, shoots, and leaves. Shooting, I like this verb, especially because I'm an Arab. We use it all the time. Eats, shoots, and leaves. I actually have done that once. I see a bank. Oh yeah, Owen is pretty famous because the word bank could have two possible interpretations. Yeah, I saw the man with the binoculars, says Shivatya. So this is a good example of structural ambiguity because the man could be holding the binoculars, or I saw the man using the binoculars. I was trying to spy on the man, mainly to assassinate him. So I used binoculars. Flying planes can be dangerous. Yes, flying planes, especially in Syria. I don't know why I'm saying this. Anywho, probably it's my, what is that called? PTSD, yeah. Flying planes, yeah. If you are flying a plane, you could end up killing yourself. Or if you're just sitting around and a plane flew by, especially a military one, you know that you're dead. Right, let's just, wonderful participation from everybody. Let's look at this cartoon. So the main thing about ambiguity is that you always have uncertainty. The uncertainty in ambiguity could be temporary, and it could be actually permanent. So in this case, it's permanent because we really don't know what if the guy has invented ambiguity or not. Whereas the sentence that Ojusui have said, I see a bank. If you say to your friends that I see a bank, I need some money. So we all know that you're going to the financial institution that is ripping us off and stealing all of our money. But if you say, I see a bank, I would like to go skinny dipping, then we all know that there's something wrong with you because nobody does skinny dipping anymore. And right, so this is taken from these guys. I went to the bank because I felt like swimming. So just an example of lexical ambiguity. So there are other examples of ambiguity, temporary ambiguity, the young manship. Now, why is this ambiguous? Can anybody tell me in the chat box? Go ahead and try. To quote Clint Eastwood, go ahead, make my day. If you first read the sentence, what is the interpretation? I think people are writing answers. Yep. The young man, the ship. The young man, the ship. So Anjali says +1. What does that mean? I don't know. +1.
So +1 is in concord with what we all have been saying, that man can be used both as a verb and as a noun.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. +1. That's a new one. The young man, the ship. So there's only one interpretation, of course. However, when you first read the sentence, the young man, the ship, you're thinking to yourself, where's the verb? Like, the young man, the ship. There should be a verb between the young man and the ship. So this interpretation takes into consideration the incremental nature of the parser. So the parser saw a DP with an adjective and a noun, attached it into one phrase, and then assumed that the ship should be like a verb or was looking for a verb. So this interpretation was wrong. The better or the correct interpretation is the young man, the ship, man as a verb. But because of the frequency of the word man and young man, the parser tends to concatenate the two into one phrase. So this is a good example of temporary ambiguity, and it's also, there's another name for it. It's called garden pathing. So garden pathing or pathing, I'm not sure. Garden pathing. So garden pathing or misleading or confusing because the sentence contains a word or word group which appears to be compatible with more than one structural analysis. Fraser and Potter, two great linguists, female, by the way, came up with this. It's been highly quoted and well-documented phenomena in linguistics, in psycholinguistics. And it's important because it tells us a lot of things about the human parser. And as I told you before, we're looking at ambiguity from a psycholinguistic point of view. So moving on. Oh yeah, puzzle time. So I'm going to give you a couple of sentences. I want you to read them, and you could either guess, or you could actually time yourself while you are reading them. And I want you to tell me which one took much more time, and then we're going to try to and see why.
Sari, before you start this,
Yeah.
are you able to access group chat, or should I read out the comments from there for you?
Right. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Okay.
So Kartik says this is a local ambiguity. Of course,
Kritika, yeah, she was
Sorry.
pretty much on point with what you were saying. Yes. Okay, back to you.
That exactly. Yeah, Kritika. Sorry, I read that Kartik.
Hmm.
I don't know why I did that. Maybe I missed Kartik. I'll tell him if I missed him if you ever see him. Anyway, so the sentences are these two. Go ahead and try to read them and see which one takes more time. Just type, if you want, the answer. Which one was faster to read for you? Take into consideration that one of the sentences is actually shorter. So usually short sentences are faster to read. Right, so a lot of people, or just we, Binu, Shreya, what else? Anjali, Kanal, Sakshi, Aisha, Nupur. Nupur was actually the first one to say one. Also, Archana, Yangchen, and Samapriya, Mamta, Shubham. Shubham or Shubham? Aspirated B. Nice. So I think most people would agree that the first one was easier to read. Why? Now the question is why one was faster to read than two. Can anybody answer this question? And hint, this is another example of garden pathing or pathing, not sure. Sakshi says ambiguity with the second. And Archana says one is less ambiguous. Sakshi also says you don't expect fell at the end. Ojasvi says relative clause helped in chunking. Chunking makes me hungry actually, because I think about chicken when I see chunking. I don't know why. Ambiguous. Yep, Archana. Because we could interpret the meaning easily with one, says Sirajani Mundal. Yeah, absolutely. That's right on the money. Because we could interpret it. That's exactly what I was trying to say. The interpretation, there's only one interpretation with one, whereas two has the verb raised, which can be interpreted as a finite verb or as a passive participle. So this confuses the parser, and the parser goes back and forth to find out cues and clues to reach a better interpretation. So that creates a burden, and your reading times actually slows down towards the end of the sentence. So take a look at this sentence. Someone shot the servant of the actor who was standing on the balcony. This sentence contains a complex DP, the servant of the actor, and then an RC, who was standing on the balcony. The question is, who was standing on the balcony? Now I want everybody who's attending this to answer this question by selecting either A, the servant, or B, the actor. Sakshidhaka says could be either. Nope. There's actually an answer to this. Anju says A, servant, servant. Mamta says servant. Anupama says servant. Shulam says A, servant. Shreya says servant. Why are you all saying servant? What happened to the actor? Because the servant is the subject of the sentence. Somebody called Saket says B. And Kanal actually says actor. Achina says servant. Aditya says B. The sentence has actually, so Andrew says actually we could be both, and Nupur agrees +1. It could be either, yes. Mamta says that. Viyom says both. Could be either, Vinu. Well, to be perfectly honest, this is an example of global ambiguity. What do we mean by global? We mean by we can never reach a final answer. However, that does not mean that native speakers of English do not have a preference. And those who answered A were actually wrong. It's B. 70%, I mean around 68% of native speakers of English say B. The answer to the question, who was standing on the balcony, is B. Now, this result was reached under controlled circumstances, as in the sentence was shown to the participants word by word. This is called self-paced reading. And the two NPs, the servant and the actor, were matched in terms of frequency. So they were both frequent words, in terms of phonemic length, and also in terms of animacy and gender. So both animate plus male. The RC attachment to the actor is common in English. However, in other languages, it differs. So in Arabic, a similar sentence with a similar structure would be, the answer would be A. So the interesting phenomenon, Aisha is saying, if it is 70 to 30% split, Sari, then no one is wrong, right? Oh, there is a preference. Well, that's true. But 70% is a huge difference from 50%. So there's evidence that they are actually preferring low attachment to the actor instead of having no preference at all. If you compare the native speakers to the learners, you could see that difference. The learners in online experiments have actually no preference at all, or sometimes their preference is reversed from the native speakers. And that's interesting, because if the natives have a preference and they're using a specific parsing strategy or a specific parsing routine, the learners, why are they their attachment preference is random, or there's 50-50% chance for both of the NPs. So that's the main question that I'm trying to answer. If we look at the syntactic structure of the two sentences, or actually the two possibilities, you could see that the RC could either be attached high to MP1, to the servant, or could be attached low to the actor. Aisha is also saying that there's also part of native speakers' competence to extrapose the RCs. I don't understand the question. We could actually discuss this point in a few moments. So the bias, Rabi is also saying, is there a bias? Of course, there's always a bias in language. Language is biased sometimes. I mean, more words occur more than others. There's more association with certain professions, that's true. But in psycholinguistic experiments, we always try to minimize that by counterbalancing the experiment. Right, so I'll just move on. So the NP or the RC, sorry, could either be attached low, high, as in on the left side of the screen, it's attached high, NP1, or it could be attached low. So before I continue to talk about my research question and my experiments, I'm just going to introduce a couple of terms that are important to understanding what's happening. First of all, whenever I talk about memory, we're dealing with working memory. The human working memory is just like, I mean, it's a construct. And if I want to give an example, it's just like the random access memory you have on your computers. It's not definitely the same. It doesn't work the same way, but I mean, this is the closest thing to that. And whenever we talk about L1ers, I mean by that native speakers. L2ers, in my research, are the late bilingual advanced learners. So those people have been learning a second or a third language after the reaching the age of 12 or 14, and they're really advanced. We're not talking about intermediate people or intermediate learners. RTs are the reading times in milliseconds. So whenever we read a word, we press a space bar, and then the computer shows the following word. So time between every space bar is measured in millisecond. Online experiment, talked about that. Offline, like comprehension questions. Right, so the main theory that I'm trying to, the predictions of shallow parsing are actually the main thing that I'm trying to examine in my research. And this theory says that L2ers, or the learners of language, underuse syntactic cues, and they overuse semantic and contextual information. So the predictions of SSH, or the shallow structure, is that without context, the attachment patterns of L2ers will be random in the RC. And sometimes if you give them, the other way, if you give them context, they'll rely heavily on context and without looking at the syntactic cues. So let me just give you concrete examples about this. But before that, let's talk about parsing strategies. So I keep repeating this word, parsing strategies. Parsing strategies are quick shortcuts that our parser uses to efficiently comprehend sentences faster. And examples of them are NVN, which is what we saw with the young man, the ship. We always tend to attach subject, verb, object, or parse sentences like that. Late closure, you tend to attach the RC to the second NP. Tuning theory is a parsing strategy where the parser relies heavily on experience. So my main research question is, or actually before that, do we have any questions? Before I go ahead, talk about my research question.
There was one question regarding the example that you had brought up earlier by Samapriya, who wanted to know whether you have controlled your experiment for native language of learners. The one where you had said the 70-50 difference between the RC, which was middle versus extraposed.
Yeah, of course. The right extraposed, of course, yeah. It's the norm in English. All of the experiments that I have done were on native Arabic speakers in Syria and learners of Arabic in India. But the English examples are taken from other people's work. So I could give you a list of the papers that talk about these things. In general, in psycholinguistics, whenever you want to make a claim, you have to back it up by experiments. So I had to do what is called norming studies to determine the baseline for my learners. And I did that with the native speakers of Arabic. And I'll talk about these experiments in a moment.
That helps.
Yeah,
Somebody
sure.
also says thanks. Please carry on.
Cool. Right. So my research question is, are advanced Indian L2 learners of Arabic, the L2ers, strongly guided by shallow parsing strategies during online comprehension? And remember, shallow parsing does not rely on syntactic cues. Shallow parsing relies more on semantics, more on the referential context. So the L2er heavily relies on that. Doesn't mean that the L2er doesn't have syntax. It doesn't mean that the L2ers are always guided by semantic cues. It just means that they are overusing it. They are over relying on semantics. And to answer this question, researchers have extensively used the ambiguous and unambiguous subject restrictive relative clause. And it is restrictive because there's no comma. And in this example 1, the killer shot the servant of the actor who was standing on the balcony. The interest areas or the critical regions are who, the RC pronoun, the auxiliary verb of the RC pronoun who was, and standing, the VP, or the V, sorry. These are called critical regions because when we present the sentence to the participants in its different forms, whether it's ambiguous or unambiguous, we always see something interesting happening at these places. And they are called critical regions because they can distinguish the different experimental conditions. And we can use these to compare native speakers with learners. Are there any questions?
None so far. Sorry, there are no questions yet.
Cool. So what is the motivation of this question? As I said earlier, the RC is either attached high or low, and it's by default depending on the language, unless context advises otherwise. Experiments have been done on many languages, mainly European languages. The English, for example, attached low. The Spanish, the Greek, who else? I think the Japanese do as well. They always attach high, and the Arabs as well attach high. And when we give sentences like one to learners, either offline or online, it shows whether they are parsing like natives or whether they are parsing like learners. Especially if we look at the critical regions, and I'll show you later how we do that. So both of research is done on European languages for obvious reasons. Mainly, this sort of research requires laboratories and huge collaboration between several researchers. And moreover, a few researchers have actually addressed the influence of contextual cues on processing. Because if you add context to the sentence, you are mainly complicating the experiment. And that makes the experiment error prone. So we tested Hindi or Urdu. I'm using Hindi or Urdu because I consider them one language, or just two dialects of the same language. We tested Hindi or Urdu learners of Arabic in biasing contexts to add it's difficult word to pronounce, generalizability of the models to L2 processing, because Arabic and Hindi are opposite in head directionality and are spoken by millions. So what does that mean? They're opposite in head directionality. It tells us that the predictions between the two languages are distinct because several theories, not several theories, actually one theory, says that because of the directionality of the head, the attachment happens either high or low. So in English, which is a it's a head initial language, the attachment happens low, whereas in Spanish, in Greek, head final language, the attachment happens high or opposite. Of course, there's other evidence against that. Italian, for example, is head final, but the attachment is low. But it would be interesting evidence to see. Right, so just to summarize the shallow structure hypothesis, L2ers build a structural model, but they're mostly oversensitive and heavily relying on semantic and pragmatic cues, just to keep that in mind. But what is our prediction? Our prediction is that L2ers will deep parse both RCs, parse RCs both online and offline. However, they might be influenced by their L1. That's my intuition, and it's based on other theories as well. let's look at two studies that we have done in order to investigate this. The first one that I was talking about earlier was the norming study. We've done that on around, actually I've done several questionnaires. So the norming study was made to decide the default attachment of the RC. So the method was two offline experiments in the form of paper questionnaires and plus the linguistic background.
Sari,
Yeah.
if we can take one question before you go into your experiments.
Sure, hold on a second.
Yeah. Sakshi wants to know whether you explicitly tested the attachment bias of Hindi-Urdu speakers for Hindi, Urdu.
Yeah, so the attachment biases have already been tested by Professor Pandey in a German study being done by German researchers. And their experiments were aimed at looking at the implicit prosody affecting attachment. So I'm relying on their norming study as the I'm relying on Professor Pandey's default attachment of Hindi. And in his study, the native speakers of Hindi actually are attaching low.
If you'd like to deal with this longer question later, then we can also do that.
Okay, so long question from Samapriya. You've probably taken this into account, but just to be sure, imagine the Hindi-Urdu speaking learners of Arabic from India learn Fusha, which is the standard Arabic, while Syrians speak their own regional Levantine variant. I'm not sure that familiar with how syntax varies across Arabic dialects, but if it does involve head position, how was that comparing Syrian natives and Indian learners handled? Exactly, that's actually a very good question. So in the Arab world, we have diglossia. Diglossia is a phenomenon I'm sure that many of you know about, but just to summarize, to quickly summarize it, a language could have two dialects, high and low variety, and the high variety is used for specific contexts. The low variety is used for daily and everyday conversations. So the sample that I have used is university students from Syria, and they have been learning standard Arabic and hearing standard Arabic and reading standard Arabic and even talking standard Arabic since they were kids. I haven't looked at the uneducated or people who come from illiterate backgrounds, because there's actually an argument nowadays in psycholinguistics whether standard Arabic is even a anyone's native language. There are people who are saying, such as Ibrahim and Avaris, who say that Arabic is the second language of Arabs. It's more like a learned language. However, they base their conclusions on some priming studies. However, there's recent evidence from an MRI study that shows the processing of standard Arabic and spoken Arabic, or the dialects of Arabic, is happening in the same brain regions as opposed to second language processing or third language processing. So we have controlled, of course, for the language variation, both in India and in Syria. So in Syria, I've only selected people from a particular linguistic background who have been, who are not bilingual speakers. They're just monolingual speakers of Arabic from Syria. And the Indian native speakers were from the Hindi belt, specifically from madrasa background, because if you do want to do psycholinguistic experiments, it's next to impossible to do it on intermediate or low, what do you call it, beginners of Arabic has a problem with the alphabet. If you are not capable of reading, you'll take forever to read the sentence, and then a psycholinguistic experiment will never be able to be designed with a beginner learner. So I specifically targeted the intermediate to advanced learners of Arabic in Jamia Millia Islamia and also in JNU. We'll talk about this more, but before that, let's take a look at the experiments.
Thank you, Sari.
Yeah, sure.
And just a note for all the participants, because we are running short on time, we are going to take all the questions at the end of the presentation now.
Right. Yeah, that's a good idea. So
over to you.
First study was an offline norming study. I wanted to see the default attachment of the RC in Arabic among native speakers of Arabic and also among learners of Arabic. So we had 24 items plus 48 filters. The items were exactly similar to 1 and 2. Someone shot the servant of the actor who was standing on the balcony. And 48 filters, so sentences that are not related. They're trying to distract the participant from guessing the purpose of the experiment. So first experiment had no context. RC was globally ambiguous. Binary questions determined the RCA, the relative clause attachment. And the participants were all monolingual Arab learners, Arabic L2, sorry. All Syrians from ABU, my university, Al-Ba'ath University, Homs. The multilingual Indians were from JNU and Jamia Millia Islamia. And the results, both samples are attaching high. So they have a bias offline. When you give them a pen and paper and you show them a list of sentences and tell them who was standing on the balcony, they mostly say it was the servant. In experiment 2, we added the context. So if you take a look at 2, that was the base sentence. And before that, 3 and 4, either 3 or 4 came. So the participant read, the gifted actor had houses in the forest, and the actor always invited friends to visit. And then the sentence came, the thief had the servant of the actor who was standing on the balcony. So a sentence with a globally ambiguous RC. However, the context was MP1 biasing. The second context was MP2 biasing. The poor servant was a good man, but the servant's life ended tragically. And then they see sentence 2. Now, the prediction is that the context is going to change the performance of both native speakers and second language learners, but that didn't happen. And is actually predicted by all the models of L2 parsing, because the L2ers have ample time to weigh different information. So after that, we've done SPR experiments, and SPR, or self-paced reading, is where you are shown a sentence word by word, and you progress by pressing the space bar. And each time you press the space bar, the computer records or logs in the time that you have taken in milliseconds. Any questions so far? Okay, questions about diglossia? I'll answer these questions at the end. All right, so moving on. Just quick look at the strengths and weaknesses of SPR. The weaknesses is that it's unnatural. It causes fatigue, and the experiment design could actually influence the reading strategies. Sometimes longer reading times do not mean higher cognitive cost. It could mean just that the participant got bored. Also, segmentation could cause prosodic problems. So it could cut short a word or a prosodic phrase, leading to different attachment. The strengths are it's cheap, reliable, replicable, and has a very strong community. It's been used and is being used, and it has actually could cater for several things. And now it's moving online, so you could do that with IPEX. I believe Sakshi has been using IPEX, and you could actually hire people to run the experiments without having to invite them to a laboratory to do that online. So study 2 was online. We had 2x2 design, 2 contexts, and 2 RCs. So why did we do the second study? Was to determine the online parsing and initial interpretations of the RCs among learners and natives, and to test the predictions of shallow searcher hypothesis and see whether learners are actually strongly guided by referential context. So the experiment was counterbalanced, as in half of the sentences had C1 context, the other half had C2, and same thing goes for attachment. In this case, the RC was actually disambiguated at the auxiliary and the RC pronoun by number. So you could say, you could actually read, someone shot the servants of the actor who were standing on the balcony. So when you say who were, you know that the attachment is high. So if you're predicting low attachment, then you'll take more time. And if we had 4 conditions, therefore, the context was biasing towards initial attachment, and then the RC was attached to the first NP using number, and context, the condition B is the opposite, and so on and so forth. The prediction is that the shadow structure hypothesis predicts a main effect of referential context on attachment on L2ers, and that L1 transfer does not happen online. So examples of online items, as you can see, the thief at the servants of the actor. ضرب اللص خدمة الممثل الذين كانوا واقفين على الشرفة. So the MP2 is the MP1 here is plural, masculine, and then from the RC Pro, to the verb is all plural, and the other way around, the experiment was counterbalanced. The servants here, the actors الممثلون أو الممثلين الذين كانوا واقفين على الشرفة. Also, the RC continues in plural, so this is low attachment. So the results of the native speakers, as you could see, these are three critical areas, critical regions. The critical regions begin with the RC Pro, and then the auxiliary verb, and then the main verb. The conditions are NP1 biasing context, NP1 attachment. So native speakers were generally faster at that, and that is expected. However, they were not really affected by context. If they were, this would be the highest. But there was some interaction happening. And if you look at the learners, you'll see something interesting. They were initially influenced by context. So they were faster in C1, N1, but when the context mismatched the attachment, they were slower. They were generally slower in the second context. And the interesting thing happens in the second critical region, where they are behaving like native speakers of Arabic. So if you compare the two, you could see that there's a similar pattern of RTs happening in the second critical region. And that leaves us with the following results. All analyses were done using linear mixed models on log RTs, which is the statistic that we have used. And you can see that the average reading times of the native speakers at the critical regions were driving the effect. So the default attachment or the high attachment was driving the effect that we have seen in the figures. And the second language learners, or the Indians, were actually native-like parsing, as evident by the second critical region, despite initial sensitivity to context. So at the RC, we found a marginal effect of context for L1ers, significant effect for L2ers, but the predictions did not hold at the auxiliary at the verb. We could argue that L2ers who mostly come from madrasa background are so advanced in Arabic that they are parsing like native speakers, but that possibility seems to be weak because our norming study, where they use pen and paper questionnaires, they were actually much, much slower than L1ers. And other models actually predict this, that L1ers or L2ers are using the same parser, but the memory queue retrieval could lead to interference that could cause non-native parsing or slowing down of parsing. It could be also that the architecture of the bilingual mental lexicon is slowing down the L2 processing because in general they are reading slower. So possible benefits of the study, better understanding of the multilingual processing, and that could actually indirectly enable us to design better teaching models. I mean, if you take the conclusions of all the studies, not only my study, but science should be taking, it's like a wheel. It keeps turning and producing benefit throughout the field. And of course, now computer models are using natural language processing to deploy the conclusions of psycholinguistics in predicting human behavior. As I said, linguistics is related to neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, and artificial intelligence. This is taken from the Endless Cognitive Science Heptagram. It exemplifies, illustrates how linguistics is actually connected to all these selected references. And thank you for listening. Just to acknowledge one thing, the research was done at JNU in collaboration with the Arabic department, Dr. Bashir, and the Arabic department from Jamia Millia Islamia with Dr. Habibullah Khan. And I thank my co-guide, Dr. Samar, for helping me out with statistics and research design. So now we'll go back to your questions.
Thank you, Sari. This was a wonderful talk which taught novices like me about psycholinguistics. And the first question that you'll have to deal with now is what Vyom said. You'll be able to read it?
Yeah, just go ahead and read it for me.
He wanted to raise a point regarding diglossia, that given diglossia, Syrian learners would also be learning the standard variety right in from the textbooks, etc. So they would also be L2 learners themselves, based on the assumptions that the two varieties differ in syntax, the standard and the dialectal variety.
That's actually a good question. But if you look at the particular situation of diglossia in Syria, Syria has a thing when it comes to standard Arabic. Syria is at the center of what used to be called Pan-Arabism, or the idea of Arabic unity. So since you're a kid, you're being exposed to standard Arabic in TV, in cartoons. So imagine watching Hindi or standard Hindi cartoons, but they're, I don't know if they have that in India. So in Syria, they are not learning; they're actually acquiring standard Arabic, because it's the language of media. TV talks in standard Arabic. We don't have English. We have standard Arabic. Although this, of course, is changing with social media. Now people are mixing English with Arabic. But the mainstream media uses standard Arabic. Cartoons the children see are in standard Arabic. Standard Arabic is the language of religion, so people have to be able to speak it in order to pray, in order to.
So both the standard and the dialectal variety, children become L1 learners of it, right?
It's a unique situation. It's I mean, as I said earlier, it's a situation where you're speaking two highly different varieties. Syrian Arabic is syntactically different from standard Arabic. But you're able to communicate in both varieties. However, the context always mandates what variety is to be spoken. So if you're talking to your parents about daily issues, you will not be speaking standard Arabic, you'll be speaking the local variety. But if you're praying, then you'll be speaking the standard. If you're watching your cartoons as a kid, you'll be watching the standard. And if you don't understand the standard, then you'll not be able to communicate with it in class, where you are supposed to speak the standard since kindergarten.
Okay. Yeah, I think that helps Vyom with his question. So I'll move on to the next question. Vyom says thanks.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Sakshi Bhatia wants to know what's the status of context influence on L1 parsing of attachment ambiguity?
Well, the context was not really influencing their attachment. I can take a look at the I think she wanted to see this one. Wait, online or offline? Because this one was done offline, and the L1ers did not have any problem with the context. They were actually just using the default.
Sakshi wants to know about
Online. Okay. So they were actually not very heavily influenced by context. Wait, am I going back or forward? They were not being heavily influenced by context. It was not determining their attachment. So this was the L1ers' responses, the reaction times.
She wants to say that in Arabic, we can see there was no influence, but was there an influence in other languages? If you could shed some light on it.
Yeah, the learners are usually more influenced by the context, whereas the native speakers always resort to their default attachment. And the default attachment usually drives the effect. Whereas with the learners, you could see either two things, either a reversed attachment pattern, or you could see that they are attaching randomly, and that the RTs in all conditions are not statistically significant from one another. So they're basically, just chancing it. Does that answer your question?
Can you hear me? Can I just follow up in person?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I was wondering was that even in as a native speaker, even if you have biases or defaults or preferences, those can be moved around by certain factors.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious for is there work looking at whether native speakers' preferences for attachment can also be moved around by the kind of context that you provide? That's what I was trying to ask.
So there's a recent study in 2020 done by Bashir. She's done her study on Turkish attachment, and she has controlled several factors. One is the working memory of the participant. So if you have higher working memory, you are more likely to attach high. Two, she manipulated the animacy of the RCs and the NPs, and the NP, which is animate, got more attachment. And she also manipulated the prosodic length of the NPs, and that actually changes the attachment pattern. So, of course, that's for native speakers, not for learners. She actually also studied learners as well. Found similar results. Does that answer your question?
She says yes, thanks. The stage is open for other questions now. Okay, last call for questions.
Okay, thank you so much for listening. And thanks so much, Aisha, for organizing this. This has been a great opportunity, and thank you for your time. I'm looking forward for any emails regarding my work, and I'll be very happy to share my PDF with you guys. And have a
Sari, why don't you write your email ID in the group chat so that if anybody have any follow-up question, they can get back to you. In the meanwhile, I'll thank Sari on behalf of the Zoomdemic team. It has been a lovely talk where we got to know about psycholinguistics and how experiments are designed. So thank you so much, Sari. And I thank the audience too for staying with us for this. Our next Zoomdemic talk is tomorrow at 2 p.m. It would be given by our former student Janani, who will be talking about bilingual lexicography. So thank you, Sari, once again. And you can see lovely words are pouring in for you in the group chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.